welcome to my podcast and to my YouTube channel. Today we have a listener with us. She contacted me by email. I think she went to my website and sent me an email because she wanted to share her story. I have to say her name is Jessica. I'm not going to say the last name. She's 33 years old. She has a son. He's going to be 10 soon, next month, right?
Yes, January.
Yeah, in January. Oh, good. Not the COVID. Oh, he was before
Yeah, I'm
COVID, right? So hopefully, he's going to have a party.
yeah, no.
I don't think so. It's too soon.
Yeah, we're
But
in California, so we're locked down.
you're in Cali. Oh, my goodness. Yeah, you just went back to like March, right? Situation in
Hmm.
March. Even worse, actually. Oh.
Yeah.
So anyway, as I was saying, Jessica contacted me because she wanted to share her story. And I have to say, Jessica, I can't even imagine what you went through. And I have to applaud you for being here today and doing this 3 months after your father died by
Mhm.
suicide. It's just so soon. And but still, that's where your heart is. You know that this is not the first suicide in your life. Unfortunately, you also lost your partner 7 years and 8 months. Kind of
Yeah,
that
it
was
was
the
just 8 years.
yeah, in
Sorry, yeah, 8 years.
2012. Yeah.
Yeah, it was December 4th,
Yeah.
2012. So.
So this is you have been, as you said, in a very strong word you used in your emails, and I was engulfed by suicide, and that really touched my heart. But thank you so much for being here with us, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me. Really, it's an honor. I started to listen to your podcast shortly after the passing of my father to kind of get connected back to our world. And I say our world in the mention of like what you say as the group you never want to be a part of. So, people who have survivors of suicide. I wanted to get back to listening to those stories and listening to those people to keep me company and a grief that
Mm.
is very particular to a certain, it's very particular to the survivors of that. And so while listening to it at the end of the podcast, it says, if you have a story you'd like to share, and I was like, well, I have one. So I wrote that to you, and I'm so honored that you asked me to do this. It really is an honor to share my story and hopefully help someone.
No, you will. I'm sure you will. Let's start with your father. Tell me a little bit about
So
him.
my father was a rock and roller.
Oh
He
my God.
yeah, he's from Maryland, Frederick, Maryland. Long hair, curly long hair. He looked like if Peter Frampton joined a hair band, like a metal hair band group. Beautiful blue eyes, slender. He was quick tempered, very reserved, and he was extremely talented. And really, he really fought for what was right in his later life, and really fought for doing the right thing and all of that. So that's and he became religious in his later years, which was also very surprising because, as you mentioned, my partner took his life, and my dad had some very strong thoughts about that. So then 8 years later, reflecting back on him sitting next to me at the service that we had for my son's father and partner, and I just visualize an empty seat now next to me. Like I can visualize myself in the Viking hall, and now there's another empty seat next to me. So I didn't know a lot about my father actually until he passed, and you discover somebody almost, I
Mm.
should say, when they pass away, when you go through their personal items.
Yeah, and what you said now, it just brought me back to all the investigative work that I did with my own father when he died. But it's so true when it comes to suicide that it's a different death. If someone dies by a car, let's say a car accident, you don't investigate anything, right? You take it as is. I mean, you know whatever
Yeah.
you know, and that's it. It was kind of the end of that. But with suicide, you keep going back and you keep searching for answers, trying to understand, and you keep asking friends, and you really have to investigate. I had never thought about that until you said this. It's different with suicide. There is this need of making meaning, right? And trying to understand what happened. So
Mm.
tell me a few things that you learned about your father.
So I early in my life, I knew I had a half sister, and so we had spoke a couple of times, but then after that, it just kind of fizzled out. And my father had told me at one point I was living in New York, and New York's about a 2-hour train ride to Maryland, and I'd wanted to meet her, and my father said, she doesn't want to meet you. But going through his address book, I found her name and number, and I said, why not give it a try? And I reached out to her, and she is the most pleasant person to talk with. And it really didn't I didn't face how intrusive that was until I told you. And you said, wow, that's pretty bold. And I didn't even put that together. But we've been now talking, and it's very nice to talk with her and to have that for possibly form that connection.
Mhm.
I found out just about my grandfather because I never knew him. My grandmother died when he was 19 or 18, so fairly early in life. So I never met them. Just about his actions, I started talking to an uncle I have. When I say my father was very private, he was very private. So it was just, I found all these old photos of him when he was a little boy. And one, you see especially in a parent child relationship, when you see the vulnerability of your parents as them as a child,
Mm.
it just takes on a whole new meaning, a whole new subset of thought of what were the actions that happened up until then, even till when he was raising me, and what drove certain decisions he did, and just seeing all these things and you're right. The first thing that happens when you go through suicide is you become the Sherlock Holmes you never knew you could. Like all of a sudden you're a seasoned detective, and you're pulling names off the internet, and you're trying to trace back. And yeah, because the world tends to throw them away societally, in my opinion. And yes, it's getting a lot better in that regard, but the world tends to throw them away. And so I think what happens when you become a detective, it's piecing that person back together, like the whole parts of them back together, and not just this act, because a man or woman should not be defined by how they leave this world, but who they were when they were in this world. And we
Yes.
lose sight of that. Oh, let me know the details. Let me know this,
Yeah.
what happened. And it gets this glorification, which I never understood. But there is when they talk about, is suicide contagious? Because when you
Mhm.
have contagions or hotspots, and this is from a podcast, last days, which is amazing, but they talk about that. And you're right. You glorify the death, not the life. And I feel like that's where
Yeah,
that
that's
search.
such a good point. That's such a good point. You shouldn't define someone because so many times, and I've seen this in families, they get so angry and it really defines who the person was. And after that, nothing else matters. They have a hard time, and it's understandable because there is a lot of pain, associated with that, and what you leave behind if you have kids and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But you really shouldn't be defined, right? and
Mm-hmm.
and you brought a very good point. Jessica, I want to ask you about grief then when you lost your partner, Reed, right? That's his
Mm-hmm.
name.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, because you wrote something to me that really touched me. You said, I should know better because here you are grieving against suicide, and you're telling yourself, why am I going through this pain again? It's like it's not the first. I should know
Mhm.
better. And you just don't, right? Because it's another grief, it's another loss, and there is no formula, right?
Yeah, and I have a somewhat logical mind where I look at things like, well, A equals B, and I have a very self-analytical personality, where you get lost in the what ifs and the should haves, and be it the difference from losing Reed to losing my father is they're two very different people and two very different importance of my life. Our son was a month shy of being 2 years old, of turning two, right before Christmas. We had been in a pretty ugly separation for about 6 months, and on that day, we reconciled and we said, you know what? We're going to be 80 years old on the front porch, high-fiving each other, and we're going to beat all the odds. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. I love you. I love you. And then he was gone. And
Wow.
it was, I mean, yeah, it was the difference. And then the difference and the similarities is my father and I hadn't spoken since 2016. And July 2nd is his birthday, was his birthday, and September 26th is when he was found. So I called him on his birthday and left this message that I love you, but I don't know what's going on, but I want to talk to you. Just give me a call. I never got a call back. I'll never get a call back. So it's now that I'm actually talking it out loud, I see a lot of the similarities in them. But
Mm-hmm.
the difficulties of expecting yourself to know better, or you tell yourself you know what you're going to do. I didn't really grieve at all after Reed passed on because I had a 2-year-old. I was 25 years old, and now I'm a single mom of a 2-year-old. Societally, there was some, blame that was put on me from his family and from other people just around, and because they saw us fighting, of course. So you always want. There needs to be a scapegoat in suicide as well. There needs to be, which there's not. There's not. There's just yourself. I mean, then that's the hardest thing, is you don't want to put any more additional weight onto the pain which someone felt so greatly that they betrayed themselves and did the one thing that we all are fighting on a daily basis not to do. So we don't want to imagine that.
Wow. Yeah.
You know?
That must have made it so much harder for you because, as you said, that it's very common in suicide. People look for who is to blame, right? And in your case, when you told me we were having these separation issues, and so, my goodness, she must have been blamed.
Oh, right away. Yeah, and it's something that's never really left me, because I too had felt a sense, you run through all those conversations you run through like, what were the signs? And of course, looking back, there were a lot of signs. There was, why on Mother's Day did you say you want to move out and live on your own for a little while? He went to the doctors because he thought he had thyroid issues because he was so tired. There was things that, even the day that I got all these missed calls from him and listened to his voicemail, I still called him back and was like, hey, what's going on? Archer and I are home. I love you. Bye. And didn't think like, these are pleas for help to answer the phone. But you can't, connect that yet. And so there was also not only the blame for fighting, but there was the blame of, I didn't answer the phone. It was in the living room and I was asleep. Talk about the what if there. What if I would have answered? What if I would have just gotten in the car and drove down there? Would that mean he's still alive? Maybe for a little bit, but if he didn't seek help, not for a long bit. And so it was that thinking that started to happen again naturally, of the what ifs and the should haves, and knowing so intensely how that robs you of life, honestly, because you get encapsulated. A part of you dies with them? And is it going to be a part or a whole part? And for a little while there, after Reed passed, it was my whole being. The guilt and the parenting, and I couldn't keep your father alive. And I mean, just, it gets to a point where you start to punish yourself, you know, and that manifested in many ways. In the next relationship I had, I was in a very, very bad relationship where I felt like it was an atonement almost to not being able to save him. So untreated grief can manifest into such dangerous situations for somebody. And so when I found myself back kind of thinking that way, I got almost like a trigger, like an anxiety of, I can't go back there again. I can't die with him. I barely got out of the first one. So it was this thinking in which got me to the place, essentially, get over it, move forward. You have a good job, you have a great house, you've got your family, like you got your son, move on, keep going.
It must be very confusing too, because I'm thinking here, you said that with Reed back then, you didn't grieve because there was so much blaming and you had a kid to raise and work and all of that. And there was a lot of self-blame as well. In a way, you said, I got into an abusive relationship because I wanted to punish myself. And here you are again, 8 months later with your dad. And you know that it's necessary to go through grief, but yet you're going, okay, but how can I grieve again the same kind of death, right? Another relationship, but it must be quite confusing too.
Yes, it's exhausting. You're exhausted by it because there is this tennis match of duality going on where you have to, I know what it looks like when you don't take care of yourself and you pull yourself supposedly from the bootstrap and move forward. You're not going to last. You're not going to last long like that. And then the other part of me is like, you can't stay in this. You know the ending. The ending is you keep living and you keep moving forward, or you die with them. What is your decision? So it's very two polar. I'm not bipolar, just depressive. But I have been. The difference now is I do have to see a therapist. Ramped it up to 2 times a week. I'm fortunate enough to have insurance to be able to see him, and it's really interesting when you go into therapy to work on trauma, and the trauma just follows you right back in the room. It's just, you can't
When did you start? When did you start the therapy?
A year and a half ago.
So before your father's death.
Yes.
Okay.
And and Reed died, it was 8 years ago. And then, yes, so almost very close time proximity, because my father's death is in September and then Reed's is in December.
Jessica, was there a moment when you realized I haven't grieved? I need to grieve. Was there a moment when you realized that?
I would say when so substance is also a part of my story, because I'm checking off all the taboos in this life. I think when it was my substance abuse ramped up tenfold, and I was in a position of, rock bottom, all those things. And it was like, this is in my belief, substance abuse is a side effect of a problem that's not being taken care of, or that's not being uprooted. And so it was really when I took a look at that I'm not doing well, that I have 3 jobs and I'm taking care of my son and I'm doing all these things, but I'm not well. I'm not a person. I'm pretty much a hollow being that's walking around trying to pretend as such. So that was a sign. And I think there's so many little parts, but it's the emptiness. It's the inability to feel happiness. Like when you feel guilty for a good day, those are some of the hardest times, because you want to have these moments. Like with my son was almost 2 years old, not even 2 years old. As time goes, he was 2. But and you have these moments and you're in it and you're laughing, and for a minute you forget about it. for a minute, you're not in the turmoil with them. And then you're at peace, and you're reminded about it because you're at peace, and you haven't been that way for a while. And it happens all over again. When you are addressing your grief, you allow yourself to have a good day. You allow yourself to feel happiness, and
you don't feel guilty about it.
Exactly right. Yes, you don't. And we want to suffer. I think that, again, with suicide being a separate death than what a cancer or something like that would be, is because you almost feel like a responsibility to suffer with them, because you couldn't do anything for them when they were here. So I must suffer with you now. I must mourn with you the loss of yourself.
And that's why sometimes you feel like I'm not entitled to happiness, right?
Exactly right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I didn't save them and I wasn't there. I didn't see the signs. And in your case, it must have been even more complicated because you were in a struggle too within the relationship, right?
Yeah, it's forever
let me
closed.
ask you, can I ask you about silence? Because that's another hallmark of suicide. One of the things that you wrote in your email was that after Reed died, nobody wanted to talk about it. His family wouldn't talk about it, and you wouldn't even bring it up until one day you had enough, and you said, "No, I need to talk about this." Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it was not so much about Reed dying, because it was known. I mean, he was in a pretty popular band within its scene. So when it was discovered, people were going to talk about it. It was the manner in which he died that was not to be spoken about. And not to be, because I understand that there sometimes is a thin line between glorifying it. But it was, for a little while there with his family, I wasn't allowed to. I didn't have any right to speak on it. I didn't have anything because I was possibly to blame for it. Therefore, it's almost like I was the murderer talking highly about my victim in some kind of way. And to a point where I was like, this is intense, and this silence about it, or the secrecy, is only going to hurt more. We are in a day and age where everything's online. I'm guilty of it. I put a lot online with the intent of, if there's somebody scrolling through or somebody out there that I know, and they see it, what is the repercussions? What do you leave behind? And listen, you're never going to stay alive for someone. I know that clearly. You don't live for other people, but it might trigger that, like, this could happen to me. I could be putting my girlfriend and son and mother and father into this position, sister, brother, whatever it may be, seeing the aftermath, the wreckage that is left. Because really it's you're passing on the pain. And there's another thin line between having to hold the person accountable for the wreckage that they lost, or they left, but also honoring that pain and not being so quiet about this, not being so taboo about this. I mean, now more than ever, what I heard is 15 to 29, the second leading death is suicide.
It is, yeah. It's unbelievable, isn't it? These statistics,
That in itself is an epidemic, and if you couple it with the drug epidemic, you couple it with the pandemic, this is not a time to be silent.
Yeah. And another number also that I hardly ever hear about, but here in the US, we talk a lot about gun violence, right? It's gun violence, homicide, and there are all these things talking about let's do something about guns and arms and everything. But do you know that more than 50%, it's almost 60% of deaths by guns in the US are suicide and not homicide? Nobody says that. Yeah.
And I bet they're mostly men from 43 on. Is that?
Yeah, it's male. Most of them are male in their 50s. It's middle-aged male, but still we cannot address gun violence if we don't address suicide. But we only talk about it from the homicide side of things, right?
Right.
Because it is a taboo, right? It is
absolutely.
A taboo.
well, on top of that, if you think about the number that the majority of people are doing that are men, there's another taboo that's coupled onto that, is the inability to give men a sensitive voice, or uh, and yes, times are changing, and a lot of people are getting a lot more sensitive and conscious of what they say and how they do, but still there's this innate, from hunter gatherer to now, this innate belief system that you are to be the pillar, you are to be strong. And to be honest, my father is part of that era. There's no way he could have reached out. There's no way he could have gotten help. There's no way he could have said, I'm hurting. That would be a defeat. That would be admitting that you're losing or that you're weak. And, you know, he was a small frame guy, had some health issues when he was little, and he was picked on a lot. I found out. I mean, he was beat up a lot. He learned how to fight because of it. And so you get ingrained that when you're even of a small stature of a male, you can't have any kind of weakness, because you have
you
so
can't
much
have
more
any
to
kind of
overcome.
emotions, right? Or
Absolutely
one of those
not.
uncomfortable emotions, unless it's anger. Anger, it's okay.
Yes,
Anger,
exactly
it's the only one that is okay.
yeah,
But
and the
all
most
the rest,
exercise. Yeah.
yeah. Jessica, let's talk about what helps you.
Mhm. So
You
what helps
mentioned you
me?
mentioned to me a book.
Yes,
It's No Time to Say Goodbye by Carla Fine. I've read that book.
yes,
It's a really good one. And I do believe in, I mean, when I was grieving, well, you're always grieving, but
right.
right after the death of my father, I think that was what helped me the most. I read numerous books, everything that I could find on suicide and grief, and
Mhm.
it really, really helped. But what else helps you?
Well, yeah. So just to circle back to that book, it was extremely helpful because suicide. I had a relationship prior to with suicide from my own um, uh, experiment with wanting to leave. I remember my first time. I was 10 years old, and I tried to suffocate myself. My cousin and my grandmother died in about a 6-month period, and that was the first time I was like, I'm gone. A little bit of influence from Romeo and Juliet that came out with Leonardo
Yeah.
DiCaprio, though, I will say. But I had a personal relationship, a secret relationship with it. And then once I heard other people's stories, it really helped me center. Um, I think what helps most is finding purpose and finding hope, because a hopeless life without purpose is almost a guarantee for you to try or to lose your life. Because if you can't see the sunset, you can't see or hear music or see your child laughing and really feel it. I mean, that's no way to live, and part of the kind of the disintegration of the soul, of the mind. So finding purpose, seeing my son and seeing how beautifully resilient this little child is. It was very important that we stay honest up until a point. We never volunteered how he died. It wasn't until he asked, you know, how is when, and with very little detail. But I mean, I still have a picture. This is his room. Still have a picture of his dad and I, because I didn't want him to be this enigma or this like this thing, you know, speaking openly about it now, so that when he's confronted with it when he's younger or when he gets older, that he'll have a security in knowing the story. There's no secret here, and highlighting who his dad was. Your dad is not his death. Your dad was this man. He was 26. He had just turned 26. He had a job at AT&T that he was doing really well at. He had his, I mean, it just goes on. So he was an amazing artist. He was this beautiful man. He was a great drummer. So those things. And when Archer does something funny like his dad, I always point that out. So to answer your question, and not to go off on a tangent, but it's, you find your purpose, and therapy, I'm 100%. It wasn't really until a year and a half ago that I got into therapy for this. I you know, would go here and there, and then I got on an antidepressant, which was an awful experience too, because
Yeah.
Here you are on the highest dosage of this medication, and nothing's happening different. And you're just like, you know, when you have trauma outside of a horrifically traumatic event happen, you I I went into a pretty intense disassociation, because in my past traumas, that's what allowed me to keep going and surviving. So I think there's also a little bit of that when I start to grieve. There's the, you know, the little girl who learned that very young to dissociate, that goes, no, we're gonna save you. We're gonna save you from this feeling. And part of grieving is the vulnerability of, whew, you have to take it on. You
Go
have to
through
feel
it.
it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a pretty instilled defense mechanism, like like an antivirus that's been instilled in me, of disassociation. You just leave your body, you just leave the feeling and just keep going.
Mm-hmm.
But it always pulls you
Well,
back down.
yes, it does. If you don't go through it, that's the thing with grief, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I am sure that this is going to help so many people. One thing that you mentioned, and I'm sure that for some of the listeners now, they're going 10 years old. She actually attempted suicide when she was 10. Here is another very scary statistic that I don't know if you've heard this one, but it's on my website. I talk about this. Uh, suicide rate for kids exactly that age, between 10 and 14 years old, has tripled in the
Mm-hmm.
last 10 years.
And yes, with the
So it
advent of,
happens.
yes,
Yeah, it
yeah,
happens.
absolutely.
It's a reality, and it's really going up. It's one of the
Mm-hmm.
numbers that really scare all of us. It is a scary one. But at the same
Yeah.
time, I look at you and I see resilience. I see someone who's taking care of herself, who is trying to help others, who is
Mm-hmm.
here talking. And you were
Yeah.
talking about your son and how you don't make this a big secret. And that's the way to do it. You waited a little bit until he was ready. He volunteered and
Mm-hmm.
he asked, and you found a way to tell him. And I hope that in the future he listens to this and he sees you on my YouTube channel, because this will be very important for his healing too. Because suicide,
Absolutely.
he not now he doesn't really grasp what it is, but in the future it will be very, very important for him to have this as a reference too.
Yes, and what's kind of scary on it, I know that they say that it's not hereditary, suicide is not hereditary, but on both sides, my grandfather on the maternal side took his life, and my father, and now his father, and on the paternal side, there is a great grandmother, there is
Mm.
a cousin, there's a handful of cousins on my side. Suicide has infected both sides of the family in pretty
Yeah.
intense roles. So
Yeah. Yeah,
there is a
yeah. As you said, it's not hereditary, but part of that is the secret too, right?
mm, mm,
Part of that is not knowing how to take care of yourself and not being able to talk about all these debts. And
and connectedness, I think, is one of the, because isolation happens first, right? The suicidal entity really, it isolates you, and it disconnects your belief of worth, of importance, that this person needs me, or that I'm even worth it, really. And so it's that isolation, it's that story, it's
yeah.
just the lack of connectedness is such a key part to it, I think, as well.
Oh, for sure. I want to end this by reading something you wrote. I actually told her she needs to write a book because she writes so well. I hope you
Thank
do.
you.
I
Yes,
hope
I
you
will.
do. So here it is. I'm going to end with this. She said, "There is no denying for me. A part of me died with both of them. But I have to keep waking up, keep mending these deep wounds, a lot caused by things out of my control, through advocacy, storytelling, and vulnerability, alongside therapy and medication if needed. That's the formula for those left behind. That's how we heal. I hope that I can find an avenue to help others. I hope that my mere existence somewhat still intact, can be of help. And it is, and that's what you just did.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jessica, for being here with
Thank
us.
you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.